The area I try and apply the things I talk about in these videos, probably more than any other, is in parenting. One, just because that's important, it's a value of mine. I want to be a good parent. I think raising our kids is an important thing. But also kind of a step deeper than that. I personally believe for most of this stuff to be effective at like a societal level, if there's going to be any change, people start to think better. Certainly there's benefit to doing it with adults, right? And trying to get them to change, but it's harder. And also there's the time component, right? If you can teach kids some of these skills on a regular ongoing basis, you now kind of keep refreshing the population with people who have better perspective, are more objective, have more humility, empathy, can think more logically, etc. And that's the betterment of all. So education, kids education in particular is something that's really important to me. So I was thinking recently about that and kind of how this all fits into teaching our kids. And, it's tricky because on the one hand, I want to teach my son to think for himself. I want to teach him to be objective. I want to teach him to understand the flaws of his mind and to make sure that he's in control and that his conscious mind is making deliberate, thoughtful, logical decisions. I want to make sure that he understands to question and to avoid certainty, because he's got to keep that kind of ferociously open mind while being ferociously skeptical. I want all those things. And you start to realize as you recognize you want those things that as we parent, as we teach our kids, in effect, we are training them. Some might even say to an extreme of we're brainwashing them. We're trying to brainwash them, and I know that has a negative connotation, but we're trying to wire their brains to understand a set of values and actions and behaviors and beliefs that we believe are right. And for someone like me, that can be difficult at times. That can feel like, well, that's exactly counter to what I want. I don't want to brainwash them. I don't want to do the wiring. I want to just allow them to think for themselves and figure it all out. But what I always have to remind myself is that the way our minds work, particularly kids, who are that ferociously open-minded, but they don't necessarily understand the ferociously skeptical yet. They are, in a word, to an extent, vulnerable. And, it could be good intentions of me to say, well, I want them to stay open-minded. I don't want their perspective to shrink based on me and the wiring that I do. The reality is they are going to be influenced. They are going to be manipulated. They are going to be brainwashed one way or another. They are humans. I mean, sure, I'm sure there's exceptions and some kids are just naturally good at this perhaps. But if we're not the ones teaching them, if we're not the ones parenting them, somebody else is. Somebody else, and by somebody else I mean it could be a teacher, it could be a family member, it could be a group of friends, it could be a TV show, it could be social media, it could be society as a whole, it could be all sorts of different things, and likely a combination of those. But the point is, the way our minds are designed, there's certain things, it seems, that are innate and animalistic and instinctual for us. But much of what we develop, which isn't a surprise in terms of our personality and how we think and how we approach the world, that's learned, that's developed over time in all different complex, nuanced ways. So given that, they are going to pick up things. They are going to form their beliefs and their values around something. So that's the balance, right? That's the trick. You want to teach them to be open-minded and think for themselves. So you want to avoid, telling them and brainwashing them from a parenting perspective. But you have to be careful of that. You have to protect them from that outside influence that's going to be there, right? You have to give them the tools to be able to distinguish and decipher and do it all. So it does get back to the idea that you want to teach them to think for themselves, but some of it you have to do some wiring. Right? And I think the best we can do in terms of that, right? So you can now start to go to extremes, which is what people often do. Well, if that outside world is going to influence them regardless, and I need to protect them, well then shit, I'm going to just teach them what it is and how they should think and what the values are and what's important to protect them from that. Well-intentioned, but I don't think it's the right answer. Or you could go the other way. Hey, I want them to be open-minded, and that starts at home and that starts with me. So whatever it is they want to do, that's on them. I'm going to keep them free and open-minded. Again, well-intentioned, but it doesn't work that way. You've just removed your influence. They're not going to be open-minded. They're going to pick up influences from other things, and that's going to be what they are. So to me, the best way to do it, hard, simple in concept, but super hard to actually execute, is you do want to teach them things. You do want to propose and provide a value system that they can start to understand, but you have to do it in a super transparent, super, what I would say, show your work way. You have to show them why, right? You have to show them why it's important, why you think these values are important, and then ultimately let them decide. That's the open-mindedness. It has to truly be open to that, right? So it gets back to a phrase I use a lot. For you to do that effectively, you have to be honest with yourself first before you can be honest with them and actually show your work, because that's what you want to do. You want to be genuine and say, hey, when I'm teaching you this thing, right, why it's important to be empathetic or humble or to share, let me explain why I think that's important. Let me lay it all out for you and give you my logic, right? But then also empower and enable you to say, hey, that makes sense, I agree, or no, I disagree. And some of that, especially in the early stages, you're gonna have to model that for them. You're gonna have to say, hey, here's what I believe, here's the values I have, show your work. Let me challenge it for you. Let me tell you the things I worry about. Let me question it myself with you so that you can see it should be questioned. And that's how you teach them to say, hey, there's some guidance here that might be useful, but I ultimately have the power to choose. And I'm aware of all these influences, and I'm aware that there's going to be things constantly trying to set my value system, but I want to be in control of it. I want to be thoughtful about it. I want to be objective and be able to look and see and have that clarity. Again, super hard to do, but to me, that's the right combo. That's the right mix to try and raise our children.